Today is a great time to have this conversation, especially in light of some of the weather that we saw, especially during 2017. And 2017 was a really historic year in terms of the weather. In fact, there were 16 different declared billion-dollar weather disasters, and some of those include ones that made a lot of headlines, like the fires that we saw in California, Hurricane Harvey and Irma and Maria, and some of the severe weather outbreaks as well. And what I think is really notable about all of those different weather events is when you combine the 16, the total cost exceeded $300 billion, which is just insane. I feel like I should do an Austin Powers reference there. But nonetheless, I think the big takeaway here is that weather can have a major impact on businesses, and it can cost just a ton of money. So what we're going to do today is kind of break away from the standard webinar presentations where you just talk over a bunch of slides. And so what I've done is welcomed in the handsome gentleman that you're seeing on the screen right now. They're some of WDT's finest employees, some of our weather solutions experts. And so what we're going to do today is talk to some of these different weather solutions experts, get some of their takes on some of the industries that they cover, and talk a little bit about some use cases and just some of the ways that weather impacts their different industries. And so without further ado, we'll spend just a brief moment doing some introductions. We'll start with Dax Cochran. He's over there with the big buck over his left-hand shoulder, and Dax is an absolute rock star. And there's a pun intended there. He services the events industries, works with a lot of different customers like artist tours. And Dax has done just a fantastic job with that vertical. He's really kicked it off for WDT, and we're truly hands down an event leader in that industry. Let's move over to Erik Faulkner. Erik is one of our newest employees here at WDT. He's a meteorologist, came from Ohio State University. A lot of experience he brings to the table. He's worked with a couple other private weather providers, now has joined WDT, and what Erik focuses on the most is commodities. Also, Richard Reid, very similar to Erik. He's a meteorologist as well. He's got a strong background in weather. He's, again, worked with a lot of different private weather providers. He's joined WDT within the last year or so. Just a great add to the team. And Richard focuses specifically on the agriculture industry. And then also joining us is Marcus Hicks. And Marcus Hicks, he is kind of a jack of all trades. What he's going to talk a little bit about today is some of his work in the public safety industry. But when I say he's a jack of all trades, it's because Marcus has really covered a lot of the different industries that we service. And then finally, also joining us from a phone call is Matt Gaffner. Matt's actually out doing some customer visits today, so kind of a busy guy. So he's joining us from the phone, but Matt is kind of our GIS guru. So he doesn't service one specific industry. He's more of a horizontal type guy, and he covers GIS. So let's go ahead and get to it. And actually, I'll give a little background on myself. My name is Andrew Tutz. I've been with Weather Decision Technologies for a couple years. I'm also a meteorologist. I started off in television, worked there for about 5 years, and then went to a private weather company to work as a meteorologist. Made a lot of forecasts for energy companies, and now with WDT, I'm more focused on the customer side of things and work a lot with utilities companies and also renewables companies. So let's go ahead and get to it. We're going to keep this really open, really conversational. But let's start off with Dax. Dax, tell me a little bit about how in the events industry they utilize our weather data, and if you have any use cases, feel free to fire away.
Yeah, sure. So as many people have probably, seen various news stories with various weather impacts at large events and festivals. The fact is that the outdoor event industry, they are extremely sensitive to weather. So we key on a number of various features and solutions that really provide everything they need to help mitigate these weather threats and make good decisions. So we'll key mainly on the more threatening weather types. So we focus a lot on things like your extreme winds, lightning, heavy rain, extreme temperatures. And it's a matter of blending our customized forecasting solution with alerting, and then of course our 24/7 forecaster monitoring.
Sure. Yeah, and I completely get it. I've done a lot of work in the athletics industry, and I know that we do a lot of work with different broadcast partners. So for those of you that are watching today, you might be NFL fans or college football fans, and you might watch a game, and all of a sudden there's a delay for lightning. A lot of times some of that data comes from us as well. Let's head down over to Erik. Erik, tell us a little bit more about your use cases. I mean, things are a little bit different than what Dax deals with. What do you tend to deal with over on the commodities side?
Yeah, so the commodity space is a little bit different than the live events industry. Mainly, it's focusing on profit. So these companies are trading commodities, mainly power, gas, and agriculture, that are tied to weather impacts. So if the weather is extreme, whether that be hot or cold temperatures, wet or dry conditions as far as rainfall, this can be directly linked to those commodity prices. So they really have to understand what's going on and what the weather forecast is, sometimes for the next hour, sometimes for the next 6 months. A couple cases that I kind of remember, and it's kind of hard to judge how well certain companies are doing because there's a number of different things they do besides commodity trading. But I remember March of 2012 was extremely warm for the entire US. And there were several companies on the wrong side of some trades there, and they lost millions of dollars. So, like I said, weather is very impactful to the commodity trading industry, particularly with temperature, rainfall, but also renewables as well. Gas traders need to understand how much generation is going into the grid between wind and solar, because then that'll offset natural gas demand. Also, when we get into the tropical season, a hurricane coming into the Gulf can have major impacts on the oil rigs and natural gas production facilities lining the Gulf. So it's a number of different impacts from weather that can really, cause some major problems for these companies.
Yeah, and Erik, I'm glad that March of 2012, I live up in Minneapolis, out of the Minneapolis office here, and remember that year really well. It was super warm, so I can imagine how it would affect commodities. One of the other things that did stand out is you said just really everything really drives profit. And so again, this is a 4-part series. We're going to cover some different topics, and one of the later webinars that we're going to do is talk about how you can profit from some weather data. So some great insight from Erik. Let's go over to Richard. Tell us a little bit more about, some of the weather things that you face on the agriculture side.
Yeah, no, so on the agricultural side, we're focused more on mitigating risk and maximizing yields. I like to usually talk about the tremendous challenge that we have in the ag space. The global agriculture market is close to $4 trillion. It's a very big business, but with an escalating population and the decrease of farmland, farmers are asked to grow more with less resources in farmland. So there's tremendous challenge to assist our farmers into becoming more efficient growers, into making better decisions, and ultimately mitigating risk and maximizing their yields. So unlike looking at it on a global broad 5,000-foot view, we're looking at agriculture down to the plant level. So we have a number of tools, whether it's through APIs or whether it's through data services or analytical services. We're providing field level weather information to growers. Precision ag software vendors will integrate our data to build decision support teams to arm the growers and agronomists. And we also have producers that we work with who have interest from the field all the way out to the end price for supply and demand. So that's really what our focus is on the field level activities of farmers and allowing them to maximize what they're doing in the fields.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. I know one of the areas that you've seen a lot of weather impacts is the public safety industry, and you shared some of those with me yesterday, kind of offline. Tell me about some of the different weather impacts that you faced in your career.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. In public safety, it's a pretty unique space because there's such a large volume of availability for weather, especially with close relationships with the National Weather Service. Many have a close relationship with even their local meteorologists, but there's also the factor of the public. And one of the things that really has been impactful as of late, especially with access to better private weather data, is consistency in messaging, and that allows them to sort of bridge the gap between different agencies all involved with weather and public safety as a whole, from fire rescue to police. They're able to coordinate and really start to get solid, and right up to parks and rec, pools. Everybody in a government organization is involved, and certainly some of the tools that private weather brings to the table really helps to bridge that gap and provide the common message in terms of what the threat really is.
Yeah, and I think one of those forms of weather data that we're starting to see used a little bit more on the public safety side of things, I know we've worked with a couple customers on this, is GIS, is actually integrating weather data into a mapping infrastructure that can actually have all your information on it. And so again, Matt Gaffner, he's our GIS guru. Matt, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, tell me a little bit more about some use cases that you've seen from GIS, and just tell us a little bit more about how more and more customers of ours are starting to use GIS data in terms of weather.
Yeah, well, the public safety is a really interesting segue, because what we've typically seen with our Esri and our GIS customers and weather data is they typically start off by just wanting to visualize data. They need to be situationally aware, and we have all kinds of data services that we host on our ArcGIS server infrastructure that make it really easy to pull into any mapping application, especially if you're using the Esri platform. And you can visualize things like commodity things like National Weather Service watches and warnings, to the radar data that we add a lot of value to by cleaning it up and let you animate it in time, to unique things like our lightning data, our hail swath algorithm, our real-time tornado tracks algorithm. And what we see is people tend to start by trying to be situationally aware, and then once they really get a grip on the data and all the functionality that comes with the data and the REST endpoints, is then they start doing more analytical things. I know we've had midstream customers that utilize forecast data to figure out how cold it's going to be and how much demand that's going to drive, so they can figure out where they need to push product through their infrastructure, or if they might have any weather that might stop production, whether it's a lack of power from an ice storm, so pump jacks aren't running or things like that, so that they can make sure that they can estimate where they might have less product, so they can move things like natural gas across the country. And it becomes a much more analytical, much more profit-driven conversation when they get kind of to that next step with a lot of the unique GIS real-time forecast and archive data services that we have.
Yeah, and I think some of the things that stand out, as you said, visualization and analytics. And I think in my career, and I think a lot of us would probably agree with us, is that more and more as you talk to customers, that's something that's a high priority for them. And it's something that separates a private weather vendor from free sources. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But myself, I work with a lot of utilities customers and renewables customers. So some example use cases on the utility side, one of the big costs is if a major storm is going to rip through the service territory, they might have to bring in external resources, because with utilities today, there's just a high demand to make sure the power gets on as quick as possible. It's higher than it's ever been before. And so a utility might look at the forecast and they might say, hey, it looks like it's going to be pretty bad. Let's bring in external resources. And for some of these utilities, I mean, this can be $1 million decision. So another example of how things are a little bit different than a free source, when you're making that $1 million decision, do you really want to jump online and just go to a random weather site? And so that's how our consulting can definitely help out. And then on the renewable side, I do a lot of work with wind farms. And so wind farms, they want lightning alerts. Basically, wind farms, they have these wind turbines. And so they're 80 meters tall, generally speaking. Some are a little bit taller. But they're basically giant lightning rods. And so they want lightning alerts to make sure that they keep their employees safe. But then also, an interesting side of things is they also like forensic lightning data. So they like to look back and see when lightning strikes occurred and what the proximity was in relation to their wind farm. Because these turbines, they can take lightning strikes. And when they take lightning strikes, it can damage the blades. And so after a thunderstorm rolls through, a site manager might want to go back, look at the archived lightning data and see, were there any turbines that were potentially hit? And if they were hit, then they'll make the changes. Because if these blades take on damage, it can affect generation of power, and it can affect profits too. So a pretty big thing there. Now let's open it up to kind of the second question today. I'll let whoever wants to kick this off, but the question is, how do private weather providers separate themselves from free weather sources? And I'll let you guys go ahead and just kind of jump in on this question.
Yeah.
Well,
Go ahead, Marcus.
I was going to say, especially from an operations perspective, say for a retailer or where a lot of my experience comes from in disaster recovery operations, it really is a driven, trusted source, mission focused, right? And so, as an example, from an operations standpoint, I had to move a lot of phone traffic, and many of our centers were disaster recovery centers. And so, we would have to ebb and flow along with weather in terms of taking that type of traffic. And again, with a public source, I have to kind of take a lot of various sources, kind of parse through differing forecasts to make a decision. Whereas using the service or private weather service, I can start to get more mission-focused information. They're providing me data that I need to make the decisions that I need to make to keep operations open. And it falls across, especially in the public safety. I can specifically target information that an emergency manager or a fire chief or a police chief might be using specifically to keep their people safe. And
Yeah, and Andrew, one of the things, when I talk about the GIS data services that we have, I kind of break them up into tiers, like commodity, things that you can find for free, and the value that we add there is the reliability, and it's 24/7 supported, so there's always a number to call. The fact that the service isn't going to change, we actually have a lot of CTOs of companies that we work with that won't let their employees or their GIS team use some free data services because they feel it's a liability if they were to rely on National Weather Service watches and warnings from a free source. If for some reason that free source changes the path to the URL or the name of the service or anything like that, and it breaks something in their critical infrastructure, that would be a huge liability for them. So those types of things, don't necessarily have to be expensive. You're just paying for the reliability, the uptime, and all that, and ensuring that the data services that a company needs as far as weather are always going to be there.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Erik, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I think in the commodity trading industry, at least, there's always a couple things you hear from traders. They want more information and they want faster information. So more can be tied into convenience because the traders aren't just looking at weather information. They're looking at a whole lot of different information, different types of information. So if you can give them, an hourly forecast, a wind generation forecast, a seasonal forecast, all in one place, then it's very helpful for them and it saves them a lot of time. Also on the point, getting faster information, some of them are trading in real time. So if you can pull down information and deliver it as fast as possible, it's very valuable to have that.
Absolutely. Richard, what about you over in the agriculture side of things? How's a private weather provider, how can they provide different content that just provides a ton of value over a free weather service?
Well, the old saying, you get what you pay for, right? And a lot of times these free weather providers out there are simply passing along government data. They don't have the resources, nor do they put the investment in to really drill down to the level that we need on the precision ag side. So we also uncover a layer beyond just the basic forecast. It's one thing to tell a grower that you have a 70% chance of rain Tuesday and Wednesday. It's going to be partly sunny. It's another thing to tell a grower over the past 2 months, using our API, you can drill down and tell how much rain has fallen and compare that to the previous growing season. You can even drill down further and look at hour by hour and run it into your pest disease modeling. So there are a number of ways that we can support that just beyond a basic forecast is what you'll typically see with free weather providers. You're just simply passing along value.
Yeah, absolutely. Dex, you have that topic?
Yeah, I'll just add that, if you're making a decision for an event, whether to stop a show, evacuate a show, these are really big, decisions that you're making. So I think that the main value is having a service that's, really keyed in on your specific location and able to provide you with all of the different data types and information that you need. Something like Lightning, for example, which is privately managed, not readily available on a lot of the free sources. And then on the weather service side, they obviously do an excellent job with their primary goal of, keeping the public informed and safe. Folks just want to think about, who they're getting their information from, making sure you have a really good understanding of where that information comes from, how it comes to you, is it keyed in on your location? Because the more understanding and education you have on your weather information and that source, the more confident you're going to be when you're making these decisions.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point. Again, we've kind of crossed some industries. I've worked a little bit with athletics, but the National Weather Service, a free provider, obviously through the government, they certainly serve their purpose. They issue things like severe thunderstorm warnings and tornado warnings. So I don't want to knock on them, but one of the things that we do that's a little bit different is the Weather Service, for instance, they're issuing, watches and warnings for, specific areas or counties or DMAs almost, so to speak. And so what we can do is we issue alerts based on your specific event. So we could issue basically a severe thunderstorm warning for your specific event. And what that can translate to, because our meteorologists are watching that event, is you just get more lead time. So say, for instance, a severe thunderstorm warning is, issued, 5 minutes before, a dangerous thunderstorm arrives at an event. If we could even provide maybe 15 minutes of lead time, that can make a huge difference, right? 5 minutes,
Right.
trying to evacuate, thousands of people in 5 minutes can be really difficult to do. If you have that 15 minutes lead time, it can make a major difference. And that's the type of thing that can, make the difference between people getting injured or even people getting killed. So
You bring up a good point as well. I mean, your private weather provider should be able to customize to your needs. So some of the standards and criteria that the Weather Service may use on what they would consider a severe thunderstorm, a lot of our customers, we find that their sensitivities are much below those thresholds. So we've got to be able to provide them the alerting and the information within their sensitivity line. So.
yeah, for sure. And while I have you, Dax, a question came in, and the question says, how intense does the weather have to be before you make the call to cancel an event or close operations? I would imagine there's not just a straightforward answer on that, but speak a little bit to that question.
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, I would always recommend that someone have a really good severe weather action plan and make sure that you have all of your various staff, departments, everyone educated on what's going to be expected of them should you have to implement any of these stages of your plan. And then on top of that, you want to maybe go through and do a lot of homework in regards to what's your capacity at this event? How long does it take to evacuate the crowd from this event? Does that take a half an hour? Once you know those kinds of things, that should really allow you to work with your weather provider to make sure they're giving you the information on that sensitivity and within the lead time that you need.
Sure. Well, thank you, and I'm glad that you bring that up, and I'm glad that question was asked, actually, because of one of our upcoming webinars, we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of having a weather safety plan, and not only just the importance, we're going to provide some guidelines, too, of what you could potentially integrate into your own weather safety plan. So that's going to be coming up in our next webinar. Just taking a look and trying to see some different questions that have been coming through. One question came through, they asked, they have a lot of different remote employees, and how could we help them in that regard? And I think one of the things that we've seen just in the last 10 years, and I think not only our panelists, but the people joining this call could attest to, is that we're moving into a mobile world. You know, people don't look at things on the computer as much as they used to. They're using a lot more apps. And I think our smartphone app is definitely a way that we can help out there. We can issue different things like lightning alerts. You know, if that's something that you're sensitive to, if you have remote employees that are going to be out and about working outdoors, if you want to keep them safe, some of our lightning alerts can help out as well. But we just push a ton of our content to those mobile apps to kind of keep everyone on the same page. And so I guess with that in mind, we're getting tight on time. So I do want to talk a little bit about some of our products and services that we do have at WDT. I'll just spend a couple minutes on that. We have a variety of different things that we offer. I just talked a little bit about the alerting that we do from the smartphone app. We also can issue alerts based on fixed locations by text, email, or push notification. We also have our team of meteorologists that we've mentioned a little bit. They're just such a valuable resource. They issue alerts. They provide consulting. Those guys did a fantastic job. We talked a little bit about those billion-dollar disasters with Harvey and Irma. They were extremely busy doing tons of different conference calls. On the weather data and analytics side, we have different APIs and data services that we work with. Richard, I know that's something that you've used a lot in your career to help service some different customers as well. But kind of our flagship service is WeatherOps. WeatherOps is a software as a service. You can view it online. You can view it from a smartphone or a tablet app. Just got a ton of different weather information. It's got forecasts. You can loop in the consulting with our meteorologists, and it's got alerting as well. And we just provide a ton of different reports. And then, of course, Matt Gaffner, I don't want to leave you hanging out to dry. We also have our GIS services as well. And again, kind of as we've talked about, that's something that's just getting bigger and bigger, and more customers want. Then Erik, on your side of things, we offer a service called Frontier Weather, used by a ton of different energy traders. It's got long-range forecasts, so your seasonal forecasts, and it's just got a lot of data files too. So if you're just looking for, you know, a forecast for the next 10 days for, you know, 50 different cities, it's a fantastic resource for that. So that's a little background on WeatherOps Commander. But again, I appreciate everyone for joining us today. If you have any questions about anything that we've talked about, you can reach out to our marketing team at the email address provided there, marketing@wdtinc.com. Or you can also reach them at 844-994-2278. We'd be happy to help you guys out. And I do want to serve as one more reminder. Again, this is a 4-part series. So we are going to have more of these webinars coming up. And by the way, if you guys have any feedback, again, this is kind of a new thing that we tried to make it a little bit more conversational and kind of get away from the way a lot of webinars have been done in the past. So if you guys have any insight or any things on what we're doing, you know, we'd be happy to hear that. But again, the next one that is coming up, Dax and I talked about it. We alluded to it a little bit. How do I make a weather safety plan? That's going to be the next webinar coming up. That one is Wednesday, May 9th, and our marketing team can send more information out about that. Until then, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.